Marcus believed he understood people within 30 seconds of meeting them. His Yale MBA hung prominently behind his corner office desk, flanked by photos of himself shaking hands with Fortune 500 CEOs. At 35, he had built his reputation on decisive judgment calls and an ability to spot talent or the lack thereof instantly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But the woman who walked into Meridian Consulting's headquarters that Tuesday morning would prove him catastrophically wrong. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing someone who seemed entirely out of place in the polished granite lobby of Meridian Consulting. Elena Rodriguez stepped onto the marble floor wearing a simple gray cardigan that had seen better years, practical black shoes that prioritized comfort over style, and carried a worn leather messenger bag that contrasted sharply with the designer. Briefcases flowing around her, Meridian Consulting occupied 3 floors of Manhattan's most exclusive business district. The lobby alone cost more than most people's annual salaries, with its imported Italian marble, hand-blown glass installations, and a reception desk carved from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood. Every detail whispered the same message: only the elite belonged here. Elena approached the reception desk with measured steps, her movements deliberate but unremarkable. The receptionist, perfectly coiffed and wearing a suit that cost more than Elena's entire outfit, glanced up with the practiced smile reserved for deliveries and maintenance staff. "Good morning. I'm here for the senior analyst position interview," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying just the faintest trace of an accent that suggested English wasn't her first language. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. She glanced at her computer screen, then back at Elena, clearly trying to reconcile what she saw with what she expected. The ... Senior analyst position. Are you certain? Elena reached into her bag and produced a printed email. The letterhead was unmistakably Meridian's, embossed with the company's distinctive logo. The receptionist read it twice before finally directing Elena to the 37th floor. The elevator ride felt eternal. Elena watched the numbers climb while catching fragments of conversations from other passengers, discussions of market volatility, merger opportunities, and weekend plans that involved private jets and exclusive resorts. She remained silent, hands folded around her messenger bag strap, eyes focused on some middle distance that suggested her thoughts were elsewhere entirely. Marcus Hamilton stood in conference room A, adjusting his tie and reviewing the candidate files one final time. As Meridian's youngest partner, he took pride in his ability to identify exceptional talent. His track record spoke for itself. Every analyst he'd hired in the past 3 years had exceeded expectations, generating millions in revenue for the firm. The position they were filling wasn't ordinary. Senior analysts at Meridian that working directly with Fortune 100 companies, crafting strategies that could make or break quarterly earnings, advising CEOs whose decisions affected thousands of jobs. It required not just intelligence, but intuition, confidence, and the ability to command respect in rooms where billions of dollars hung in the balance. "She's here," his assistant knocked and entered. "Elena Rodriguez." Marcus nodded, straightening his shoulders. He'd already reviewed her resume. Impressive on paper, certainly. MBA from a respectable state school, solid work experience at mid-tier consulting firms. But Meridian was different. Meridian was the apex of the consulting world. Paper credentials only told part of the story. Elena entered the conference room like someone trying not to disturb the air around her. While Marcus projected confidence through his posture, his firm handshake, and his direct gaze, she seemed to occupy space apologetically. Her handshake was brief, her eyes didn't quite meet his, and she settled into the chair across from him, with the careful movements of someone accustomed to taking up as little room as possible. "Thank you for coming in today," Marcus began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd conducted hundreds of such interviews. "I've reviewed your background, and I have to say, it's interesting." The pause before interesting was deliberate. Marcus had learned that initial uncertainty often revealed how candidates handled pressure. Would she defend herself? Overcompensate with false bravado? Crumble under the subtle questioning of her qualifications? Alina simply nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Tell me about your experience at Davidson & Associates," Marcus said, referring to her previous firm. Davidson was respectable enough, but hardly in Meridian's league. Mid-market consulting, regional clients, the kind of place we're promising. Careers often plateaued. "I spent 4 years there, primarily working with manufacturing companies on operational efficiency improvements," Alina replied. Her voice remained steady, but she didn't elaborate. No enthusiasm, no sales pitch, no attempt to embellish her accomplishments. Marcus frowned slightly. Most candidates at this level would have launched into detailed success stories, quantified achievements, painted pictures of transformative results. Alina's response felt almost dismissive of her own experience. "And what kind of results did you achieve?" "The projects were successful." Again, minimal elaboration. No specifics about percentage improvements, cost savings, or client satisfaction scores. "I see." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her more carefully. Something about her demeanor suggested either profound insecurity or something else entirely, though he couldn't quite identify what that something else might be. The interview continued in this pattern. Marcus would ask probing questions designed to elicit passion, ambition, and confidence. Alina would provide factually accurate but emotionally flat responses. When he asked about her greatest professional achievement, she mentioned completing projects on time and within budget. When he inquired about her long-term career goals, she said she wanted to continue learning. Other candidates had sat in that same chair, describing their visions of transforming entire industries, their dreams of building consulting empires, their burning ambitions to work with the world's most powerful executives. Alina spoke as if she were applying for a position at a small-town accounting firm. "Why Meridian?" Marcus finally asked the question that usually separated the truly exceptional from the merely qualified. Alina was quiet for several seconds, her gaze drifting to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Manhattan's financial district. "The work seemed challenging," she said eventually. Marcus almost laughed. Seemed challenging? Goldman Sachs was challenging. McKinsey was challenging. Meridian Consulting was the pinnacle of strategic advisory services, the firm that Fortune 100 CEOs called when their companies faced existential threats or unprecedented opportunities. Challenging was an understatement that bordered on the insulting. "Alina," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "Meridian's clients include companies whose market capitalizations exceed the GDP of most countries. Our recommendations influence decisions that affect millions of people. The partners here earn more in a single quarter than most people see in their entire careers. When you say the work seems challenging, I have to wonder if you fully understand what we do here." For the first time during the interview, Alina's composure shifted almost imperceptibly. Not defensiveness exactly, but something that suggested his words had landed differently than intended. She met his gaze directly for perhaps the first time since entering the room. "I understand what you do here," she said quietly. There was something in her tone, not arrogance, but certainty, that made Marcus pause. He studied her more carefully, noting details he'd initially dismissed. Her clothes might have been inexpensive, but they were impeccably maintained. Her bag was worn but high-quality leather that had aged rather than deteriorated. Her hands showed no signs of manicure or jewelry, but her nails were perfectly maintained, and her fingers moved with a precision that suggested familiarity with detailed work. Walk me through how you'd approach a client whose revenue has declined 15% year-over-year across 3 consecutive quarters, Marcus said. Shifting to a practical scenario, most candidates would ask clarifying questions first. What industry? What size company? What market conditions? Alina simply nodded and began speaking. Her analysis was methodical but comprehensive. She outlined a systematic approach to identifying root causes, described frameworks for evaluating both internal operational issues and external market factors, and suggested a phased approach to implementing solutions that balanced immediate stabilization needs with long-term growth requirements. What struck Marcus wasn't just the substance of her response, but its organization. She spoke as if she were accessing a mental filing system of proven methodologies, each component precisely categorized and instantly retrievable. No hesitation, no verbal fillers, no rambling tangents that plague even experienced consultants. When thinking out loud. That's a solid framework, Marcus admitted, though something about the way she'd delivered it nagged at him. Have you used that approach before? Similar situations require similar methodologies, Alina replied, which wasn't quite an answer. The interview concluded with Marcus feeling oddly unsettled. On paper, Elena Rodriguez was qualified but unremarkable. In person, she presented as someone lacking the confidence and drive typically associated with elite consulting. Yet her technical responses had been sharp, organized, and demonstrated depth of thinking that contradicted her otherwise underwhelming presentation. As she gathered her belongings to leave, Marcus found himself studying her movements again. There was something deliberately unremarkable about how she carried herself, as if she were actively trying to avoid drawing attention rather than simply being naturally unassuming. We'll be in touch within a week, he told her, the standard closing for interviews that could go either way. Elena nodded and headed for the door. Just before leaving, she turned back. Thank you for your time. I know this position is important to the firm. After she left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, trying to reconcile his impressions. His instincts told him Elena Rodriguez lacked the aggressive confidence that characterized Meridian's most successful consultants. She seemed almost apologetic about her own presence, as if she didn't quite believe she belonged in the same room as him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But her analytical responses had demonstrated a sophistication that contradicted everything else about her presentation. It was as if 2 different people had shown up for the interview, one who seemed intimidated by the environment, and another who possessed the kind of structured thinking typically found only among consultants with decades of experience at top-tier firms. Marcus pulled up Elena's resume on his computer and read it again more carefully. 4 years at Davidson & Associates. Prior to that, an MBA from the University of Houston. Before business school, a 5-year gap that her resume simply described as consulting work. No company name, no specifics, just a vague reference that could mean anything from freelance projects to unemployment. He made a note to have HR verify her references more thoroughly. Something about Elena Rodriguez didn't quite add up, though he couldn't articulate exactly what bothered him about the interview. 3 floors down, Elena waited for the elevator in Meridian's lobby. The polished marble reflected her image back at her, a woman who looked like she'd wandered into the wrong building by mistake. Around her, Meridian's employees moved with the purposeful energy of people who knew they belonged at the center of the business universe. The elevator arrived, and Elena stepped inside alongside a group of junior associates discussing weekend plans in the Hamptons. She remained silent during the descent, her face revealing nothing of what she might be thinking. As the elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened, Elena Rodriguez walked back into Manhattan streets, carrying secrets that would have fundamentally altered Marcus Hamilton's understanding of who had just sat across from him in conference room A. But those secrets remained hidden behind carefully constructed ordinariness, waiting for the right moment to surface and transform everything about the power dynamics at Meridian Consulting. Elena received the offer letter 3 days later. The salary was modest by Meridian standards, significantly less than what other senior analysts commanded, but she accepted without negotiation. Her first day arrived with all the ceremony typically reserved for mid-level administrative hires, a brief orientation with HR, a standard issue laptop, and a cubicle tucked away in the corner of the analyst floor, far from the windowed offices, where the real decision-makers worked. Marcus had decided to assign Elena to the Hartwell Industries account, a mid-sized manufacturing company that was struggling with supply chain inefficiencies. It wasn't Meridian's most prestigious client, but it would be a good test of her capabilities without risking damage to the firm's more important relationships. Rodriguez will be supporting the Hartwell engagement, Marcus announced during the Monday morning team meeting. She handled data analysis and preliminary research. The conference room contained 8 of Meridian's brightest minds, Harvard MBAs, former investment bankers, consultants who'd cut their teeth at McKinsey and Bain before joining Meridian's elite ranks. When Marcus mentioned Elena's assignment, the subtle exchange of glances around the table spoke volumes. Supporting roles on second-tier clients weren't the typical starting point for senior analyst positions. Elena entered the conference room 5 minutes into the meeting. Having gotten lost trying to navigate Meridian's maze-like floor plan, she slipped into an empty chair at the far end of the table, pulling out a simple notebook while others opened expensive leather portfolios or typed on the latest tablets. As I was saying, Marcus continued, the Hartwell engagement requires a comprehensive analysis of their procurement processes. We need to identify inefficiencies and recommend optimization strategies. James Chun, a senior associate who joined Meridian directly from Wharton, leaned back in his chair. Hartwell's been bleeding money for 18 months. Their procurement team couldn't optimize a grocery list, let alone a complex supply chain. Laughter rippled around the table. Elena made a note in her simple notebook, her expression unchanged. Rodriguez, Marcus addressed her directly. I want you to start by reviewing their current vendor relationships. Build a comprehensive database of suppliers, contract terms, and pricing structures. It was the kind of task typically assigned to first-year analysts fresh out of college data collection and basic organization. Around the table, several team members recognized the assignment for what it was: busy work designed to keep Elena occupied while the real consulting happened elsewhere. Of course, Elena replied, her voice carrying no hint of disappointment or recognition that she'd been given what amounted to administrative work. After the meeting, Elena made her way to her assigned workspace. The cubicle sat in a cluster of similar workstations, but the others belonged to junior staff members, recent graduates who joined Meridian's Analyst Development Program. At 32, Elena was notably older than her cubicle neighbors, another subtle indication of her position within the firm's hierarchy. The Hartwell files arrived in 17 bankers' boxes, physical documents that no one else had bothered to digitize or organize. Elena spent her first week methodically working through purchase orders, vendor contracts, and procurement records dating back 5 years. While other analysts attended client meetings and strategy sessions, she sat surrounded by paper, building the database Marcus had requested. How's our new data entry specialist working out? James asked Marcus during lunch at the executive dining room on the 42nd floor. The comment drew knowing smiles from the other senior staff members present. Marcus cut into his grilled salmon, considering the question. She's thorough, I'll give her that. But thoroughness only gets you so far in this business. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena had identified 17 critical inefficiencies in Hartwell's procurement process within her first 3 days. She'd spotted duplicate vendor relationships that were costing the company hundreds of thousands. Annually, discovered contract terms that heavily favored suppliers, and uncovered evidence of systematic overcharging across multiple product categories. But when Marcus stopped by her cubicle for a progress update, Alina simply handed him a neat spreadsheet listing vendor names, contact information, and basic contract details, exactly what he'd requested, nothing more. "This is good work," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he found it unremarkable. "Keep building the database. We'll need comprehensive coverage before we can begin any meaningful analysis." Alina nodded and returned to her computer screen. She didn't mention the inefficiencies she'd already identified, didn't suggest immediate cost-saving opportunities, didn't push to expand her role beyond data collection. The pattern continued for 2 weeks. Alina arrived each morning at 7:30 before most of the senior staff and left promptly at 6. She ate lunch alone at her desk, declined invitations to after-work drinks with other analysts, and maintained the same measured, unremarkable presence she'd demonstrated during her interview. But subtle signs suggested there was more too. Elena Rodriguez then met the eye. When the coffee machine on the analyst floor broke down, Elena mentioned to the maintenance staff that the problem was likely a clogged water line rather than an electrical issue. She was correct, and the machine was fixed within an hour instead of requiring an expensive service call. During a conversation about supply chain management between 2 junior analysts, Elena listened silently while they debated the merits of just-in-time inventory systems. When one of them made a factual error about Toyota's production methods, Elena quietly corrected him with a precision that suggested deep familiarity with the subject. "How did you know that?" the analyst asked. "I read about it somewhere," Elena replied, returning to her work. The most telling incident occurred during Elena's 3rd week at Meridian. The fire alarm malfunctioned during a particularly busy afternoon, triggering an evacuation of the entire building. As 40 floors of office workers descended through the stairwells, Elena moved through the crowd with an efficiency that stood out. While others fumbled with their belongings or complained about the inconvenience, Elena calmly guided several elderly visitors toward the safest exit route, helped a colleague carrying heavy files, and positioned herself near potential bottleneck points to keep foot traffic flowing smoothly. "She handles crisis situations well," observed Sarah Mitchell, one of Meridian's senior partners, who'd watched Elena's behavior during the evacuation. "Most people either panic or freeze when routines get disrupted. But when the all-clear came, and everyone returned to their offices, Elena resumed her quiet data analysis as if nothing had happened. She didn't seek recognition for her helpfulness during the evacuation, didn't use the incident as an opportunity to demonstrate leadership qualities to senior staff members. Marcus began assigning Elena additional research tasks, testing the boundaries of her capabilities. He asked her to analyze pricing trends across Hartwell's supplier base, expecting basic charts and simple observations. Instead, Elena delivered a sophisticated analysis that identified seasonal pricing patterns, correlated them with commodity market fluctuations, and projected optimal purchasing windows that could reduce costs by 12% annually. "This is quite detailed," Marcus commented when Elena presented her findings. "Where did you learn this type of analysis?" "Previous experience," Elena replied, offering no specifics about where or when she developed such advanced analytical skills. Marcus felt increasingly puzzled by Elena's performance. Her work consistently exceeded expectations, but her presentation remained self-effacing to the point of being almost apologetic. She possessed technical skills that rivaled consultants with decades of experience, yet she seemed content to remain invisible within Meridian's hierarchy. The disconnect became more apparent during team meetings. When senior staff members discussed strategy options for various clients, Elena would occasionally make notes that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of complex business dynamics. But she never volunteered insights, never challenged assumptions, never positioned herself as someone with valuable perspectives to contribute. Rodriguez seems competent enough, James Chun mentioned to Marcus after a particularly productive week. But she's not exactly leadership material. Good analyst maybe, but she'll never be a partner. Marcus nodded, though privately he wondered if James was missing something important. Elena's analytical work had become indispensable to the Hartwell engagement, yet she remained almost invisible during client presentations and strategy discussions. The turning point came during Elena's 4th week at Meridian. Hartwell's CEO, Robert Kingston, scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss supply chain disruptions that were threatening the company's quarterly projections. A critical supplier had suddenly increased prices by 30%, and Hartwell needed immediate solutions to avoid significant losses. Marcus assembled his team for a crisis strategy session, including Elena despite her junior status on the engagement. The conference room filled with Meridian's best minds, each contributing ideas for managing the supply chain emergency. "We need alternative suppliers immediately," James suggested. "Hartwell can't afford to accept the price increase." "Agreed," added Sarah Chun, another senior associate. "But switching suppliers mid-quarter could create quality control issues." The discussion continued for an hour, with various team members proposing solutions that ranged from renegotiating contracts to restructuring Hartwell's procurement processes. Elena sat quietly at the end of the table, taking notes but contributing nothing to the conversation. Finally, Marcus turned to her directly. "Rodriguez, you've been working with Hartwell's vendor data longer than anyone. Do you have any insights about alternative suppliers?" Elena looked up from her notebook, her expression unchanged. "There are 3 viable alternatives," she said quietly. "But the problem isn't finding new suppliers." The room fell silent. Marcus raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. "The supplier raising prices controls 68% of the specialty components Hartwell requires," Elena continued. "They're exploiting market concentration, not responding to actual cost increases. Alternative suppliers exist, but they can't scale to meet Hartwell's volume requirements within the timeframe needed." "So what do you suggest?" Marcus asked. Elena was quiet for several seconds, as if weighing whether to continue. "Vertical integration," she said finally. "Hartwell should acquire one of the smaller suppliers. The purchase cost would be less than the annual price increase, and it would eliminate future vulnerability to market manipulation." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to everything the team had been discussing. Vertical integration was a sophisticated strategic option that required deep understanding of both Hartwell's business model and the supplier marketplace. It wasn't the kind of recommendation typically offered by someone whose primary responsibility was data entry. "That's actually brilliant," Sarah Chun said slowly. "Why didn't we think of that?" Elena shrugged slightly, as if the insight weren't particularly noteworthy. The data supported that conclusion. But Marcus studied Elena more carefully, recognizing that her suggestion went far beyond simple data analysis. Recommending strategic acquisitions required understanding of corporate finance, market dynamics, operational integration challenges, and regulatory considerations. It was the kind of high-level strategic thinking that separated senior consultants from analysts. "How confident are you in that recommendation?" Marcus asked. "Very confident," Elena replied. Though her tone remained matter-of-fact, rather than assertive, the meeting concluded with the team agreeing to present Elena's vertical integration strategy to Hartwell's leadership. As other team members filed out of the conference room, Marcus lingered, watching Elena pack her simple notebook. "That was an impressive analysis," he said. Elena looked up, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the second time since joining Meridian. "Thank you. How did you develop that level of strategic insight?" Marcus pressed. "Your resume doesn't indicate experience with acquisition strategy." Elena closed her notebook carefully. "Experience comes from many sources," she said. then gathered her belongings and left the conference room. Marcus remained behind, staring. At the whiteboard, where Elena's vertical integration strategy was still outlined in neat handwriting. Something about Elena Rodriguez didn't add up, and the discrepancies were becoming harder to ignore. Outside the conference room, Elena returned to her cubicle and resumed working through Hartwell's procurement data. Around her, junior analysts discussed weekend plans and complained about demanding clients. Elena listened to their conversations while organizing spreadsheets, her expression revealing nothing about the strategic breakthrough she just delivered or the growing questions about her background that she'd seen in Marcus Hamilton's eyes. Pattern of her mysterious competence was becoming more difficult to conceal. But Elena continued her careful performance of ordinariness, carrying secrets that would soon transform everything about the power dynamics at Meridian Consulting. The emergency call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday that would change everything at Meridian Consulting. Marcus's phone buzzed while he was reviewing quarterly projections over his morning espresso. The caller ID displaying Robert Kingston's direct line, never a good sign when Hartwell's CEO contacted them before 7 in the morning. "We have a crisis," Kingston's voice carried the tight control of someone barely containing panic. TechFlow Industries just announced they're terminating all supplier relationships effective immediately. They're our largest client, Marcus. 68% of our revenue. If we can't find a solution in the next 72 hours, Hartwell Industries is finished. Marcus set down his coffee cup, his mind racing through the implications. TechFlow's announcement would trigger a cascade of consequences immediate. Cash flow problems, potential bankruptcy, thousands of jobs lost. It was the kind of business catastrophe that could destroy both the client company and the consulting firm's reputation if handled poorly. "I'm calling an emergency team meeting for 8 a.m., Marcus said. "We'll mobilize every resource Meridian has." By 8 o'clock, Conference Room A had transformed into a war room. 17 of Meridian's senior consultants crowded around the polished table, laptops open, phones charging, coffee cups multiplying as the gravity of the situation became clear. Wall-mounted screens displayed Hartwell's financial projections, TechFlow's public announcement, and real-time stock prices that continued falling as news of the termination spread. Elena entered the room, carrying her worn messenger bag and simple notebook, taking the only remaining seat near the back corner. Her presence among the senior staff felt incongruous, like someone had mistakenly invited the office administrator to a board meeting. TechFlow cited strategic realignment and cost optimization in their announcement, Marcus began, reading from the press release. But our sources suggest the real reason is political. Their new procurement director has personal relationships with competitors. James Chun pulled up TechFlow's organizational chart on his tablet. "We need to identify decision-makers who might reverse this. Someone with enough influence to override the procurement director's preferences." "What about their board of directors?" suggested Sarah Mitchell. "If we can demonstrate the financial risk of switching suppliers mid-cycle, they might intervene." The room buzzed with activity as teams formed around different strategies. Some consultants focused on identifying alternative clients to replace TechFlow's revenue. Others researched competitive suppliers who might be vulnerable to aggressive pricing. A third group worked on restructuring scenarios that would allow Hartwell to survive with dramatically reduced income. Elena remained silent throughout the initial brainstorming, taking occasional notes while the room's energy escalated. Around her, senior partners threw out ideas with the confidence of people accustomed to solving impossible problems. Whiteboards filled with organizational charts, financial projections, and timeline analyses. "We need to approach TechFlow's CEO directly," declared Patricia Hayes, one of Meridian's most aggressive partners. "Skip the procurement director entirely and appeal to the top." "Too risky," James countered. "If we go over their procurement director's head and fail, we burn any chance of future reconciliation." The debate continued for 40 minutes, with various factions forming around different strategic approaches. Marcus monitored the discussions while privately calculating the odds of success for each proposed solution. None of them felt adequate to the magnitude of the crisis. "Rodriguez," he said suddenly, interrupting a heated exchange about regulatory compliance. "You've been quiet. What's your assessment?" Elena looked up from her notebook, her expression unchanged despite being thrust into the spotlight of 17 senior consultants' attention. The room fell silent, waiting for her response. "The strategies being discussed are addressing symptoms, not causes," she said quietly. Patricia Hayes frowned. "Meaning?" Elena set down her pen carefully. TechFlow didn't terminate their relationship with Hartwell because of cost optimization or strategic realignment. They terminated because someone convinced them Hartwell was becoming a liability. "What kind of liability?" Marcus asked. "Regulatory," Elena replied. TechFlow's procurement director has been receiving pressure from federal auditors about supplier compliance standards. Hartwell's manufacturing processes don't meet the new environmental regulations that take effect next quarter. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Several consultants immediately began searching their laptops for information about the regulatory requirements Elena had mentioned. "How do you know this?" Patricia demanded. Elena gestured toward her notebook. "It's in the public records. The Environmental Protection Agency published updated manufacturing standards 8 months ago. The implementation deadline is next quarter. TechFlow is preparing for an audit, and non-compliant suppliers represent potential fines in the millions." James Chun found the EPA documentation on his laptop. "She's right. The new standards are extensive, and the penalties for non-compliance are severe. So TechFlow isn't abandoning Hartwell because of cost," Sarah realized. "They're protecting themselves from regulatory exposure." Elena nodded. "Which means the real solution isn't replacing TechFlow as a client or restructuring Hartwell's finances. The solution is bringing Hartwell into compliance with the new environmental standards before the audit deadline." Marcus studied Elena more intently. "That kind of compliance upgrade would typically take 6 to 12 months. We have 72 hours. 6 to 12 months using traditional consulting approaches," Elena said quietly. "But there are accelerated compliance protocols designed specifically for emergency situations." The room leaned forward collectively. Environmental compliance wasn't a specialty area for most of Meridian's consultants, but Elena was speaking with the precision of someone who understood the regulatory landscape intimately. "What kind of accelerated protocols?" Patricia asked. Elena opened her notebook and began reading from handwritten notes. "The EPA allows emergency compliance certification through third-party auditing firms. If Hartwell can demonstrate good faith efforts to achieve compliance and submit a detailed implementation plan, they can receive provisional certification that satisfies customer requirements." "How do you know about these protocols?" Marcus pressed. "I researched them when I first reviewed Hartwell's supplier agreements," Elena replied. "Environmental compliance has become a significant factor in B2B relationships." But her answer felt incomplete. The depth of her knowledge about regulatory procedures suggested more than casual research. She was describing complex bureaucratic processes with the fluency of someone who'd navigated them before. "Can it actually be done in 72 hours? James asked. Elena was quiet for several seconds, as if calculating multiple variables simultaneously. "Yes, but it requires perfect execution and extensive coordination with regulatory specialists." "Do you know regulatory specialists who could handle this?" Marcus asked. "I know people who understand the process," Elena said carefully. The room buzzed with renewed energy as the consultants recognized they might have found a viable solution. Instead of trying to replace TechFlow's revenue or restructure Hartwell's entire business model, they could address the underlying compliance issue that had triggered the crisis. "This is brilliant," Patricia said, though her tone carried a note of suspicion. "But implementing emergency compliance protocols isn't exactly standard consulting work. It requires specialized knowledge of environmental law, regulatory procedures, and government agency operations." Elena met Patricia's gaze directly. "Every problem has a solution if you understand the underlying systems." "What underlying systems?" Marcus asked. "Regulatory frameworks, bureaucratic processes, the intersection between private sector operations and government oversight," Elena replied. "Most consultants focus on business strategy and financial optimization. But sometimes the real constraints are regulatory or legal." The explanation was technically accurate but deliberately vague. Elena's careful words revealing depth of knowledge while concealing its origins. Around the table, senior consultants exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to suspect. Elena Rodriguez possessed expertise that extended far beyond the data analysis role she'd been assigned. "How confident are you that this approach will work?" Marcus asked. Elena closed her notebook. "If executed properly, with the right regulatory specialists and complete cooperation from Hartwell's management, there's an 85% probability of success." The precision of her estimate drew more surprised looks. Most consultants spoke in general terms about probability and risk. Elena was providing specific percentages as if she'd performed detailed quantitative analysis in her head. 85%, James repeated. "That's remarkably specific. How did you calculate that?" "Historical success rates for emergency compliance certifications, combined with assessment of Hartwell's current operational status and the time constraints involved." Elena replied matter-of-factly. Marcus realized that Elena wasn't just proposing a solution, she was demonstrating mastery of a specialized field that none of Meridian's other consultants understood. Environmental regulatory compliance was a niche expertise that typically required years of experience working directly with government agencies. "Rodriguez," he said slowly, "your background is in general business consulting. Where did you develop expertise in environmental regulatory processes?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her expression revealing nothing about the internal calculations taking place. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a subtle shift in tone that suggested she was choosing her words very carefully. "Previous consulting work included projects involving regulatory compliance," she said. "What kind of projects?" Patricia pressed. "Various industrial clients are facing similar challenges," Elena replied, maintaining her pattern of providing technically accurate but deliberately incomplete answers. The room fell silent as the daily implications settled. Elena Rodriguez, the woman they'd assigned to data entry tasks and treated as a junior analyst, had just demonstrated sophisticated understanding of specialized regulatory processes that could save their client from bankruptcy. Her quiet competence was beginning to feel less like humility and more like something deliberately concealed. "All right," Marcus said finally. "Rodriguez will lead the compliance initiative. We'll mobilize support resources and coordinate with Hartwell's management. But this is your strategy." Elena nodded, accepting the responsibility without apparent surprise or excitement. "I'll need direct access to Hartwell's manufacturing data, environmental impact records, and current compliance documentation. Also phone access to reach regulatory specialists." "Whatever you need," Marcus replied, though privately he wondered what kind of regulatory specialists Elena planned to contact. As the meeting dispersed, Elena gathered her belongings while senior consultants approached Marcus with questions about her background and qualifications. The woman they'd dismissed as an unremarkable analyst had just demonstrated capabilities that none of them possessed, delivering a strategic solution that addressed the root cause of their client's existential crisis. Elena left conference room, carrying the same worn messenger bag and simple notebook she'd brought to every meeting. her expression unchanged despite having assumed responsibility for saving Hartwell Industries. Behind her, Meridian's senior staff began implementing her emergency compliance strategy while quietly questioning everything they thought they knew about the consultant they'd underestimated, the crisis that had threatened to destroy both Hartwell and Meridian's reputation had become the catalyst that would finally begin revealing who Elena Rodriguez really was, and why her expertise in regulatory compliance went far deeper than any resume could suggest. But Elena maintained her careful composure as she returned to her cubicle, preparing to make phone calls that would soon demonstrate just how extensive her network of government contacts actually was, and how many secrets she'd been keeping behind her deliberately unremarkable facade. The success of Elena's regulatory compliance strategy should have been Marcus Hamilton's triumph. Within 18 hours of implementing her emergency protocols, Hartwell Industries received provisional certification from the EPA. TechFlow reversed their termination decision, and Meridian Consulting had saved a client relationship worth $37 million annually. Instead, Marcus found himself increasingly unsettled by questions that Elena's competence had raised rather than answered. He spent Friday evening in his corner office long after most staff had departed, surrounded by documents that painted an incomplete picture of Elena Rodriguez's background. Her employment verification from Davidson and Associates confirmed her 4-year tenure, but the reference letters were curiously generic, praising her analytical skills and professional demeanor, without citing specific achievements or projects. 5-year gap in her resume before business school remained unexplained. Consulting work could mean anything from freelance projects for small businesses to something far more substantial. Elena's facility with regulatory compliance suggested experience working directly with government agencies, but no such employment appeared in any official records. Most troubling was Elena's reaction to leading the Hartwell rescue. She'd coordinated with EPA officials, managed complex bureaucratic procedures, and negotiated provisional certification agreements with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done it countless times before. Yet when Marcus had congratulated her on the success, Elena had simply nodded and returned to organizing procurement data as if saving a client from bankruptcy was routine administrative work. Monday morning brought an unexpected complication. Patricia Hayes burst into Marcus's office at 7:30 a.m., her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of early morning urgency. "We have a problem," she announced, closing the door behind her. "I spent the weekend investigating Rodriguez's background. Something doesn't add up." Marcus gestured for her to sit, though Patricia remained standing, pacing between his desk and the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The EPA contact she used for Hartwell's certification, Dr. Michael Chun, he's not just some regulatory specialist. He's the Associate Administrator for Environmental Compliance, one of the most senior officials in the entire agency. People at his level don't take phone calls from junior consultants." "Maybe Elena exaggerated her connection with him," Marcus suggested, though he remembered Elena's confidence when making those regulatory calls. "I thought so too," Patricia continued. "So I had our government relations team make some discreet inquiries. Dr. Chun not only knows Elena Rodriguez personally, he considers her one of the most effective compliance specialists he's ever worked with." His exact words. Marcus frowned. Effective compliance specialists aren't typically employed at mid-tier consulting firms like Davidson and Associates. Exactly. Which made me wonder what kind of compliance work Elena was doing during that 5-year gap in her resume. Patricia pulled out her phone and read from her notes. "I contacted 3 other federal agencies, Treasury, Commerce, and Justice. Elena Rodriguez has worked as a consultant for all of them within the past 7 years." The implications settled over Marcus like a cold weight. Federal agencies didn't hire consultants for routine work. They brought in specialists for complex, high-stakes projects that required both technical expertise and security clearances. What kind of consulting work? Marcus asked. That's where it gets interesting, Patricia replied. Everyone I spoke with praised Elena's capabilities, but nobody would discuss specifics. When federal officials won't talk about someone's work history, it usually means one of two things: either the projects were classified, or the person worked in some kind of enforcement capacity. Marcus stared at Elena's personnel file, seeing it now in an entirely different context. Her measured responses during the interview, her careful answers about her background, her remarkable composure under pressure characteristics he'd initially interpreted as insecurity might actually represent something else entirely. There's more, Patricia said. Elena's academic records from the University of Houston show she completed her MBA in 18 months instead of the typical 24. She tested out of half the required courses and wrote her thesis on regulatory compliance in complex financial institutions. Her advisor described her as having practical knowledge that exceeded anything typically seen in academic settings. Practical knowledge, Marcus repeated. From where? Her thesis advisor suggested Elena had significant prior experience with federal regulatory frameworks, but when I pressed for details, he said Elena had requested that specifics about her background remain confidential. Marcus began connecting pieces of a puzzle that painted a very different picture of Elena Rodriguez. Her expertise in regulatory compliance wasn't the result of casual research or general consulting experience. It represented deep, specialized knowledge typically possessed only by people who'd worked inside the regulatory system itself. What are you suggesting? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand Patricia's concerns. I'm suggesting that Elena Rodriguez isn't who she appears to be, Patricia replied. Her background, her skills, her connections with senior federal officials, none of it matches someone who should be working as a junior analyst at a consulting firm. The conversation was interrupted by Elena herself, who appeared in the doorway, carrying her morning coffee and simple messenger bag. Her timing felt almost supernatural, as if she'd sensed she was being discussed. Marcus, I wanted to update you on the Hartwell implementation schedule, Elena said, her voice carrying its usual quiet certainty. The final compliance documentation should be ready by Wednesday. Patricia studied Elena with new intensity, searching for signs of the expertise that her weekend investigation had uncovered. But Elena's appearance remained unchanged: simple clothing, unremarkable demeanor, the same carefully constructed ordinariness that had characterized her presence at Meridian. Thank you, Rodriguez, Marcus said. Excellent work on the emergency certification. Elena nodded and turned to leave, but Patricia stopped her. Elena, I'm curious about your previous consulting work. You mentioned working with regulatory compliance. What kind of federal agencies did you work with? Elena paused, her hand on the doorframe. For just a moment, her careful composure seemed to shift, as if she were rapidly calculating the implications of Patricia's question. Various agencies, Elena replied. Projects involving compliance and risk assessment. What kind of risk assessment? Patricia pressed. Elena turned back to face them, and Marcus noticed something different in her expression, a subtle hardening that suggested Patricia's questions had touched on sensitive territory. Risk assessment covers many areas, Elena said. Carefully. Financial institutions, environmental compliance, operational security. Different agencies have different requirements. Operational security? Patricia seized on the phrase. That's an interesting term. Most business consultants would say operational efficiency or process optimization. Operational security suggests something more specialized. Elena was quiet. For several seconds, her gaze moving between Marcus and Patricia, as if evaluating how much they suspected and how much she should reveal. Security considerations are part of any compliance framework, Elena said finally. Ensuring that processes meet regulatory requirements while maintaining operational integrity. The explanation was technically accurate, but deliberately evasive. Elena's pattern of providing information that answered the literal question while concealing its broader context. But Patricia wasn't satisfied with diplomatic non-answers. "Elena, I spent the weekend researching your background," Patricia said directly. "Federal officials at multiple agencies know you personally and consider you highly effective at compliance work. That level of recognition doesn't come from routine consulting projects." Elena's expression remained calm, but Marcus detected a subtle shift in her posture, a stillness that reminded him of how she'd handled the building evacuation, moving through crisis with practiced efficiency. "I take my work seriously," Elena replied. "Building professional relationships is important in any field." "Building relationships is one thing," Patricia continued. "Having the Associate Administrator for Environmental Compliance personally expedite certification requests suggests something more substantial than professional networking." The confrontation was escalating beyond professional curiosity into direct challenge. Marcus watched Elena's reaction, recognizing that Patricia was forcing her to either reveal more about her background or maintain her careful facade under increasingly aggressive questioning. "Dr. Chun and I have worked together on several projects," Elena said, her tone remaining steady despite the pressure. "Professional relationships develop over time." "What kind of projects?" Patricia demanded. "Compliance consulting for private sector clients, or something involving federal enforcement?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her expression revealing nothing about the calculations taking place behind her careful composure. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a subtle edge that Marcus hadn't heard before. "My previous work experience is documented in my personnel file," Elena said. "If you have concerns about my qualifications or background, perhaps we should discuss them with HR rather than speculating about my professional relationships." The response was diplomatic but firm, Elena essentially declining to provide the detailed explanations that Patricia was demanding. But her refusal to elaborate only reinforced Patricia's suspicions that Elena was concealing something significant about her background. "This isn't about qualifications," Patricia replied. "This is about understanding who we're working with. When someone demonstrates expertise that goes far beyond their stated background, it raises questions about what else might be undisclosed." "Such as?" Elena asked quietly. "Such as whether Elena Rodriguez is actually your real name," Patricia said bluntly. "Whether your consulting experience involved law enforcement or intelligence work. Whether there are aspects of your background that could affect Meridian's relationship with our clients." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge that could no longer be ignored. Marcus watched Elena's reaction, noting that she didn't appear surprised by Patricia's suspicions, as if she'd been expecting this confrontation since joining Meridian. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," Elena said calmly. "My background is in business consulting. My work has involved regulatory compliance across multiple industries and agencies. Everything in my personnel file is accurate, but incomplete," Patricia pressed, "deliberately incomplete." Elena met Patricia's gaze directly, and Marcus saw something flash in her eyes, not anger or defensiveness, but something that looked like resignation mixed with calculation. "Everyone's personnel file is incomplete," Elena said quietly. "We all have experiences and relationships that don't appear in official documentation. The question is whether those omissions are relevant to our current work. When those omissions involve unexplained expertise and high-level government connections, they become relevant," Patricia replied. The standoff continued for several seconds, two professionals engaged in a battle of wills, disguised as a discussion about background verification. Elena maintained her calm composure while Patricia pushed for revelations that Elena clearly had no intention of providing. Finally, Elena gathered her messenger bag and stepped toward the door. "If you have specific concerns about my performance, or conduct, please document them appropriately. Otherwise, I have work to complete for the Hartwell implementation. She left Marcus's office with the same measured steps she'd used since joining Meridian. But the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Patricia's investigation had transformed Elena from an underestimated analyst into someone whose true background remained mysteriously concealed, despite mounting evidence of capabilities that extended far beyond routine business consulting. "She's hiding something," Patricia said after Elena had departed. "The question is whether it's something that could damage Meridian's reputation or create legal liability." Marcus nodded, though privately he wondered if the real question was whether Elena Rodriguez represented an opportunity or a threat, and whether they were prepared for either possibility. Outside his office, Elena returned to her cubicle and resumed working on Hartwell's compliance documentation, her expression revealing nothing about the confrontation that had just occurred, or the secrets that Patricia Hayes was determined to uncover. But the careful balance Elena had maintained since joining Meridian was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain, and the growing pressure would soon force her to make a choice between continued concealment and revelations that would transform everything about how Meridian Consulting understood power, expertise, and the woman they'd so dramatically underestimated. Call that would shatter Elena Rodriguez's carefully constructed facade came at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday that had begun like any other. Marcus was reviewing quarterly projections when his assistant announced that Director Michael Harrison from the Federal Bureau of Investigation was on line 1, requesting immediate discussion about a matter of mutual interest regarding one of your employees. Marcus's stomach dropped. In 20 years of consulting, he'd never received a call from the FBI about personnel matters. He accepted the call with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Hamilton," Director Harrison's voice carried the kind of authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "I understand you have Elena Rodriguez working as a consultant at your firm." "Yes, she's one of our analysts," Marcus replied carefully. "Is there some kind of problem?" "No problem at all," Harrison said. "Quite the opposite. I'm calling because we need Elena's expertise for a situation that's developed, and I wanted to ensure Meridian Consulting understands exactly who you have working for you." Marcus felt his world tilt slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." "Elena Rodriguez is a former Deputy Associate Director of Financial Crimes Enforcement at the Treasury Department," Harrison explained. "She spent 8 years investigating corporate fraud, money laundering, and regulatory violations at the highest levels of government. She's also worked extensively with the FBI, CIA, and Department of Justice on cases involving national security." Implications. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Deputy Associate Director was a senior executive position, typically requiring Senate confirmation and security clearances that took years to obtain. Elena Rodriguez, the woman they'd assigned to data entry tasks, was a former high-ranking federal official. "That's impossible," Marcus managed. "Her resume shows business consulting experience, not government service." Elena requested that her federal service record remain classified when she left government. Harrison continued. "Standard protocol for people transitioning from sensitive positions. But given current circumstances, I'm authorized to provide limited disclosure." Marcus's mind raced through implications that felt too large to process. Every interaction with Elena suddenly required recontextualization: her regulatory expertise, her government connections, her unusual composure under pressure. "What current circumstances?" Marcus asked. "We have reason to believe that Carlyle Financial Group is engaged in systematic money laundering operations. The evidence suggests they're using their consulting relationships to legitimize illegal transactions." Elena worked the original investigation that identified their methods. Marcus knew Carlyle Financial. They were one of Meridian's oldest and most profitable clients, a relationship that generated nearly $15 million annually. If they were involved in money laundering, Meridian's reputation would be devastated. We need Elena to review Carlyle's recent transactions and identify patterns that might indicate continued illegal activity. Harrison said, "Time is critical. We're executing search warrants tomorrow morning." The conversation ended with arrangements for Elena to report to federal offices immediately. Marcus sat in his office for several minutes after hanging up, trying to process revelations that challenged everything he thought he understood about professional competence, government service, and the woman who'd been working in a cubicle. 30 feet from his office, he found Elena exactly where she always was, surrounded by spreadsheets, quietly organizing data with the same methodical precision she'd demonstrated since joining Meridian. The scene felt surreal now that he knew her background included investigating billion-dollar financial crimes and coordinating with intelligence agencies. "Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice strained, "can I see you in my office?" Elena looked up from her computer, her expression unchanging despite the tension in Marcus's tone. She gathered her notebook and followed him through the maze of cubicles, past senior associates who had no idea they'd been working alongside a former federal executive. Patricia Hayes was already waiting in Marcus's office, having been summoned for what Marcus had described as an urgent personnel matter. She studied Elena with renewed intensity, her weekend investigation suddenly feeling like amateur detective work compared to what Marcus had just learned. "Elena," Marcus began, then stopped, unsure how to navigate a conversation that involved classified information and potential criminal activity. "I just received a call from FBI Director Harrison." Elena's reaction was almost imperceptible, a slight straightening of her shoulders that suggested she'd been expecting this moment since joining Meridian. Her expression remained calm, but Marcus detected something that looked like relief mixed with resignation. "I see," Elena said quietly. "He informed me that you're a former Deputy Associate Director of Financial Crimes Enforcement at the Treasury Department." Marcus continued, 8 years investigating corporate fraud and money laundering at the federal level." Patricia's mouth fell open. Deputy Associate Director was a position that reported directly to cabinet-level officials, someone who testified before Congress and coordinated multi-agency investigations involving hundreds of millions of dollars. "Among other things," Elena replied, her voice carrying the same measured tone she'd used when discussing procurement spreadsheets. "Among other things?" Patricia repeated. "What other things?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much classified information she could reveal without violating federal disclosure laws. "I worked in various capacities across multiple agencies," Elena said carefully. "Financial crimes, regulatory, compliance, some counterintelligence work involving economic espionage." The casual mention of counterintelligence hit Marcus like a revelation that required complete recalibration of Elena's identity. Counterintelligence work suggested involvement with national security issues, foreign threats, the kind of classified operations that most people only encountered in movies. "Why are you working as a junior analyst at a consulting firm?" Patricia demanded. "People with your background become partners at major firms or start their own practices." Elena looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered Marcus's commanding view of Manhattan's financial district, her gaze seeming to focus on something beyond the immediate landscape. "Because I was tired," Elena said simply. 8 years of investigating financial crimes, testifying in federal court, coordinating with intelligence agencies, it changes you. I wanted to work with numbers and spreadsheets without wondering if the data represented someone's attempt to fund terrorism or destabilize currency markets. The explanation was deeply personal, revealing a vulnerability that Elena had kept hidden behind her carefully constructed professional facade. Marcus began understanding that her measured demeanor wasn't insecurity or lack of confidence. It was the composure of someone who'd operated at levels where Mistakes could affect national security. Director Harrison mentioned Carlyle Financial. Marcus said, he indicated you worked on their original investigation. Elena's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Carlyle Financial Group has been under federal surveillance for 7 years. The original investigation identified them as a sophisticated money laundering operation using legitimate business relationships to process illegal transactions. They're our client, Patricia said, the implications hitting her immediately. One of our oldest and most profitable relationships. I know, Elena replied. I recognized their name when I reviewed Meridian's client list. It's part of why I accepted the position here. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place with uncomfortable clarity. You didn't randomly apply for a job at Meridian. You specifically sought us out because of our relationship with Carlyle. Elena nodded slowly. The FBI has been monitoring Carlyle's consulting relationships, looking for evidence of how they legitimize illegal transactions. When they learned I was transitioning to private sector work, they asked me to maintain informal oversight. You're working undercover, Patricia realized. Your entire presence here is part of a federal investigation. Not exactly undercover, Elena corrected. More like maintaining situational awareness. If Carlyle attempted to use Meridian for money laundering purposes, I was positioned to identify and report suspicious activity. The revelation transformed everything about Elena's time at Meridian. Her careful analysis of client data, her attention to financial details, her systematic approach to organizing information activities they'd interpreted as routine. Analyst work had actually been sophisticated surveillance of potential criminal activity. Have you found evidence of money laundering? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Elena opened her notebook and turned to a section filled with detailed financial notations. Carlyle has been using Meridian's recommendation letters to create legitimacy for shell companies involved in international transactions. 3 separate instances in the past 6 months where Meridian's endorsement helped Carlyle entities establish banking relationships that were later used to process suspicious transfers. Marcus felt sick. Meridian's reputation had been unknowingly leveraged to facilitate potential criminal activity, and the firm's most prestigious client relationship was about to become the center of a federal money laundering investigation. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will execute search warrants at Carlyle's offices and request documentation from all associated consulting firms, Elena continued. Meridian will be required to provide complete records of your relationship with Carlyle, including all recommendation letters, financial analyses, and strategic advice provided over the past 3 years. This will destroy us, Patricia said quietly. When news breaks that we've been associated with money laundering, no legitimate client will work with Meridian. Elena closed her notebook and looked directly at Marcus. Not necessarily. The investigation will demonstrate that Meridian was an unwitting participant, not a knowing accomplice. Your cooperation with federal authorities will actually strengthen your reputation for ethical business practices. How can you be certain? Marcus asked. Because I've spent the past 2 months documenting every interaction between Meridian and Carlyle, proving that your firm had no knowledge of their illegal activities. Elena replied. My reports will exonerate Meridian while providing evidence needed to prosecute Carlyle's money laundering operations. The scope of Elena's deception, if it could be called deception, was staggering. While working as their junior analyst, she'd been conducting a federal investigation that would simultaneously protect Meridian's reputation and provide evidence for criminal prosecutions. Why didn't you tell us? Marcus asked. Elena was quiet for several seconds before responding. Because the investigation required observing Meridian's normal business practices without contamination from knowledge of potential criminal activity. If you'd known about Carlyle's illegal operations, you might have altered your behavior in ways that compromised the evidence collection. "And now?" Patricia asked. "Now the investigation is complete," Elena said. "Federal agents have sufficient evidence to proceed with prosecutions, and Meridian's reputation will be protected through documented proof of your firm's ethical conduct." Marcus struggled to process the implications. The woman they'd assigned to data entry tasks had spent 2 months conducting a sophisticated federal investigation while simultaneously protecting the firm from criminal liability. Her expertise in regulatory compliance hadn't been mysterious. It had been the foundation of her investigative methodology. "Who else knows about this?" Marcus asked. "Director Harrison, selected federal prosecutors, and senior officials at Treasury and Justice," Elena replied. "The information was classified until today's disclosure authorization." Patricia studied Elena with a mixture of awe and resentment. "So while we were treating you like a junior analyst, you were actually running a federal investigation into our most important client?" "Yes," Elena said simply. "And you let us assign you to procurement spreadsheets and data entry tasks without saying anything." "The work needed to be done regardless of my background," Elena replied. "And maintaining my cover required accepting whatever assignments were provided." Marcus realized that Elena's careful humility hadn't been insecurity or lack of ambition. It had been professional necessity disguised as personal modesty. Her measured responses to questions about her background hadn't represented evasiveness, but adherence to federal disclosure restrictions that she couldn't explain without compromising. "An active investigation. What happens now?" Marcus asked. Elena stood, gathering her notebook with the same deliberate movements she'd used throughout her time at Meridian. "I'll be working with federal prosecutors to prepare evidence for Carlyle's prosecution. My assignment at Meridian is complete." "You're leaving?" Patricia asked. "My work here was always temporary," Elena replied, "though I'll be available to testify about Meridian's cooperation with federal authorities, should that become necessary." As Elena moved toward the door, Marcus found himself grappling with questions that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. "Elena, one more thing. The woman who interviewed for this position, quiet, seemingly lacking confidence, was any of that real?" Elena paused at the doorway, turning back with an expression that revealed more vulnerability than Marcus had seen during her entire tenure at Meridian. "After 8 years of investigating financial crimes, testifying in federal court, and coordinating multi-agency operations, I genuinely wasn't sure I could function in a normal business environment," Elena said quietly. "The uncertainty you interpreted as lack of confidence was real. I just wasn't certain whether I still knew how to be anything other than a federal investigator." The admission transformed Marcus's understanding one final time. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just a former federal executive conducting undercover surveillance. She was someone trying to reclaim a normal professional life while simultaneously completing one last federal assignment. She left Meridian Consulting that afternoon, carrying the same worn messenger bag she'd brought on her first day. But everything about her presence had been revealed as vastly more complex than anyone had imagined. The quiet analyst who'd organized procurement spreadsheets had been protecting them from criminal liability, while gathering evidence that would dismantle a sophisticated money laundering operation. Behind her, Marcus and Patricia began the complex process of understanding how dramatically they'd misjudged someone whose expertise, dedication, and federal service record represented everything they'd claimed to value in professional consulting, hidden behind a carefully constructed facade of ordinariness that had been both genuine humility and operational necessity. The earthquake of revelation was complete, and nothing at Meridian Consulting would ever be the same. The Carlyle financial raids began at 6 a.m. sharp, coordinated across 17 locations in 6 cities. Federal agents descended on offices, server farms, and private residences with the precision of a military operation, seizing computers, financial records, and encrypted communications that would eventually dismantle one of the most sophisticated Money laundering networks in recent history. Marcus watched the news coverage from his office. CNN's financial correspondent reporting from outside Carlyle's Manhattan headquarters, while FBI agents loaded boxes of evidence into unmarked vans. The reporter mentioned that federal authorities received cooperation from consulting firms that had unknowingly been used to legitimize illegal transactions, a reference that made Marcus's stomach clench with recognition. By noon, Meridian's phones were ringing constantly. Reporters, competitors, and nervous clients all wanted to know the same thing. How deeply was Meridian Consulting involved in the Carlyle investigation? Marcus had prepared a statement with the firm's legal team. But every conversation felt like navigating a minefield where one wrong word could destroy 20 years of reputation building. Meridian Consulting has fully cooperated with federal authorities and will continue to do so throughout the investigation, became his standard response. We had no knowledge of any illegal activities and are committed to maintaining the highest standards of ethical business conduct. What Marcus couldn't say publicly was that Elena Rodriguez had spent 2 months systematically documenting every interaction between Meridian and Carlyle, creating an evidence trail that would ultimately exonerate the firm while providing prosecutors with detailed proof of criminal activity. The revelation of Elena's true identity had created chaos throughout Meridian's organizational structure. Senior partners who had treated her as a junior analyst suddenly found themselves questioning their judgment about talent recognition. Junior associates who had worked alongside her felt both amazed and intimidated by the realization that they'd been collaborating with a former federal executive. Patricia Hayes had spent Wednesday morning reviewing every interaction she'd had with Elena, searching for clues she should have recognized. Elena's calm handling of the building evacuation, her precise knowledge of regulatory procedures, her network of high-level government contact signs that should have indicated expertise far beyond routine business consulting. I've been thinking about this all wrong, Patricia told Marcus during their emergency partner meeting. We assumed Elena was hiding something because she lacked confidence. But she wasn't hiding incompetence. She was concealing expertise that we weren't cleared to know about. Marcus nodded, still processing the magnitude of their misunderstanding. 8 years investigating financial crimes at the federal level, and we assigned her to organize procurement spreadsheets. The procurement spreadsheets were part of her investigation, Patricia realized. She was documenting every financial relationship between Meridian and Carlyle, building the evidence trail that would ultimately protect us. The broader implications were staggering. While senior partners had been dismissing Elena as unremarkable, she had been conducting sophisticated surveillance that would save the firm from criminal liability. Her methodical approach to organizing data hadn't been busy work. It had been the foundation of a federal investigation that required meticulous documentation and precise analysis. Thursday brought more complications. James Chun burst into Marcus's office with news that felt like another earthquake. The Justice Department called, James announced. They want to offer Elena a position as Chief Compliance Officer for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's a senior executive appointment that requires Senate confirmation. Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride that someone of Elena's caliber had worked at Meridian, combined with the sobering recognition that they'd almost certainly lost the opportunity to retain her services permanently. Are you surprised? Marcus asked. Honestly? Yes and no, James replied. Elena's work on the Carlyle investigation was apparently so comprehensive that federal prosecutors are using her documentation as the primary evidence foundation for their case. She essentially gift-wrapped a money laundering prosecution while simultaneously protecting Meridian from any legal exposure. The scope of Elena's professional capabilities was becoming clearer through external validation. Federal authorities weren't just praising her investigative work. They were offering her positions that reflected recognition of her expertise at the highest levels of government. Friday, Afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Elena Rodriguez appeared at Meridian's reception desk, dressed in the same simple attire she'd worn as their analyst, carrying the same worn messenger bag that had become her signature. But something fundamental had changed about her presence, a subtle confidence that suggested she was no longer concealing her professional identity. Marcus met her in the lobby, noting that several staff members stopped their conversations to watch Elena's interaction with obvious curiosity. Word of her background had spread throughout the firm, transforming her from overlooked analyst to something approaching legend. "Elena," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. I wanted to thank you personally." Elena replied, her handshake firm and direct in a way that contrasted with her previous carefully measured interactions. "And to apologize for the deception, even though it was necessary." They walked to Marcus's office, past colleagues who observed Elena with new understanding. The woman they'd dismissed as lacking confidence was actually someone whose professional achievements exceeded those of most senior partners at the firm. "The federal prosecutors are pleased with the evidence quality," Elena continued once they were seated. "The Carlyle investigation should result in prosecutions that dismantle their entire money laundering network. More importantly for Meridian, the documentation clearly demonstrates that your firm was an unwitting participant rather than a knowing accomplice." Marcus felt relief wash over him. "What does that mean practically?" "It means Meridian's reputation will actually be enhanced by this investigation," Elena explained. "When the story breaks publicly, the narrative will focus on how your firm's ethical business practices and cooperation with federal authorities helped expose criminal activity. You'll be seen as part of the solution rather than part of the problem." The transformation was remarkable. What had initially seemed like a potential catastrophe for Meridian was becoming a testament to the firm's integrity and commitment to lawful business practices. "There's something else," Elena said, reaching into her messenger bag. "I've prepared a comprehensive report on regulatory compliance best practices for consulting firms. Consider it a parting gift." She handed Marcus a bound document that looked like the kind of detailed analysis that typically cost clients hundreds of thousands of dollars. The report outlines systematic approaches to identifying potential criminal activity, establishing ethical safeguards, and maintaining compliance with federal regulations. "Elena, this is extraordinary work," Marcus said, flipping through pages of sophisticated legal and procedural analysis. "This could transform how we approach client relationships." "It's based on 8 years of federal investigations," Elena replied. "I've seen how criminal organizations exploit legitimate business relationships. The report includes specific procedures for preventing that exploitation." Marcus realized that Elena's final contribution to Meridian was potentially more valuable than any single client engagement. The compliance framework she'd developed would protect the firm from future legal risks while establishing industry-leading standards for ethical business conduct. "I have a question," Marcus said. "Throughout your time here, you demonstrated capabilities that far exceeded your assigned responsibilities. Why didn't you seek more challenging work or push for advancement?" Elena was quiet for a moment, her expression reflecting the same thoughtfulness Marcus had observed during their initial interview. "Because I needed to remember what it felt like to work on normal business problems," Elena said finally. 8 years of investigating financial crimes, coordinating with intelligence agencies, testifying in federal court, it creates a perspective where everything feels like a potential threat or criminal conspiracy. And organizing procurement spreadsheets helped with that. Organizing procurement spreadsheets reminded me that most business activities are legitimate, straightforward, and don't involve criminal intent," Elena replied. "It was therapeutic, in a way, working with numbers and data without wondering if they represented evidence of terrorist financing or foreign espionage." The explanation revealed Elena's time at Meridian as a form of professional rehabilitation, a way of transitioning from high-stakes federal investigations to normal business, consulting while simultaneously completing one final federal assignment. "What's next for you?" Marcus asked. "The Justice Department has offered me a position as Chief Compliance Officer for FinCEN," Elena said. "It's a senior executive appointment that would involve overseeing financial crimes enforcement across all federal agencies." Marcus wasn't surprised. The position Elena was describing represented the pinnacle of federal law enforcement careers, the kind of appointment reserved for people with extraordinary expertise and unquestioned integrity. "Will you accept?" "I'm not sure," Elena replied, her uncertainty genuine. "Part of me wants to continue working in the private sector, applying federal expertise to help legitimate businesses navigate regulatory compliance. But part of me feels obligated to continue serving the public interest through government work." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on Marcus's door. Patricia Hayes entered, carrying a document that she handed to Elena with obvious respect. "I wanted to give you this personally," Patricia said. "It's a formal recommendation letter for whatever position you choose to pursue next. It documents your exceptional performance during the Carlisle investigation and your contributions to Meridian's compliance procedures." Elena accepted the letter with surprise. "Thank you. That wasn't necessary." "Yes, it was," Patricia replied. "I spent considerable time investigating your background and questioning your qualifications. The least I can do is provide accurate documentation of your actual capabilities." The gesture represented more than professional courtesy. It was Patricia's acknowledgement that her aggressive questioning had been based on incomplete information and unfounded suspicions. "Actually," Marcus said, an idea forming, "what if you didn't have to choose between public and private sector work?" Elena looked at him with curiosity. "What if Meridian created a position that allowed you to serve both interests?" Marcus continued. "Senior Director of Regulatory Compliance, with responsibility for developing ethical business practices while maintaining relationships with federal authorities. You could help legitimate businesses navigate regulatory requirements while ensuring they don't inadvertently facilitate criminal activity." The proposal was unprecedented at Meridian. The firm had never created a senior executive position specifically focused on regulatory compliance, but Elena's unique background and demonstrated capabilities suggested it could be transformative for both the firm and its clients. The position would include equity partnership and complete autonomy to establish compliance protocols, Marcus added, plus consulting relationships with federal agencies that need private sector expertise. Elena considered the offer carefully. "It would be different. Most people with my background either stay in government or move to traditional private sector roles. But a hybrid position that serves both interests could be valuable. Think about it," Marcus said. "You could help businesses operate ethically while maintaining the investigative work that you're clearly passionate about." Elena nodded, gathering her messenger bag. "I appreciate the offer. Let me consider all the options." As she prepared to leave, Marcus felt compelled to address the fundamental question that had been bothering him since learning Lana's true identity. "Elena, one final question. During your interview, you seemed genuinely uncertain about your qualifications for this position. Was that performance, or were you actually questioning your ability to work in normal business consulting?" Elena paused at the door, her expression revealing the vulnerability that had been hidden behind her professional competence. "After 8 years of investigating financial crimes, I honestly wasn't sure I could function in an environment where people weren't trying to deceive me or hide criminal activity," Elena said quietly. "The uncertainty you observed was genuine. I'd forgotten what it felt like to work with honest data and legitimate business relationships." The admission transformed Marcus's understanding of Elena's journey at Meridian. She hadn't been performing humility or concealing arrogance. She had been genuinely uncertain about her ability to transition from federal investigations to normal business consulting. "Your time here helped with that transition?" Marcus asked. "Working with procurement spreadsheets, organizing vendor relationships, analyzing supply chain data, it reminded me that most business activities are exactly what they appear to be," Elena replied. "It was professionally rehabilitative in ways I didn't expect." Elena left Meridian Consulting that afternoon, carrying the same worn messenger bag she'd brought on her first day, but everything about her relationship with the firm had been fundamentally transformed. The quiet analyst who'd organized procurement data was revealed as someone whose expertise and dedication had saved the firm from criminal liability, while conducting a sophisticated federal investigation. Behind her, Marcus and Patricia began implementing the compliance protocols Elena had developed, establishing new standards for ethical business conduct that would protect Meridian from future legal risks, while enhancing the firm's reputation for integrity. The aftermath of Elena's revelation was complete, and Meridian Consulting would never again mistake quiet competence for lack of capability, or underestimate the value of someone who chose to serve others rather than promote themselves. 6 months after Elena Rodriguez's revelation transformed Meridian Consulting, the firm occupied a fundamentally different position in the corporate consulting landscape. What had begun as a potential catastrophe involving money laundering allegations had evolved into industry recognition for pioneering ethical business practices and regulatory compliance excellence. The transformation was visible throughout Meridian's offices. Where once the walls displayed traditional markers of consulting prestige photos with Fortune 500 CEOs, framed deal announcements, awards for revenue generation, now they included certifications for ethical business conduct, letters of commendation from federal agencies, and articles about Meridian's innovative approach to compliance-focused consulting. Elena had ultimately accepted Marcus's hybrid proposal, but with modifications that reflected her unique perspective on serving both public and private interests. As Senior Director of Regulatory Compliance and Government Relations, she divided her time between helping Meridian's clients navigate complex regulatory environments and consulting with federal agencies on private sector compliance issues. Her office, a proper corner office with windows, finally had become a pilgrimage site for consulting professionals from across the industry. Word had spread through professional networks about the former federal investigator who had revolutionized business compliance while working undercover as a junior analyst, and requests for her expertise arrived daily from companies seeking to avoid the regulatory pitfalls that had destroyed Carlyle Financial. The Elena Rodriguez effect, as industry publications had dubbed it, extended far beyond Meridian's immediate operations. Her compliance framework had been adopted by 17 major consulting firms, creating new industry standards for identifying and preventing criminal exploitation of legitimate business relationships. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of fielding calls from federal agencies seeking to hire Meridian services, a complete reversal of the typical dynamic where consulting firms pursued government contracts. Elena's reputation within federal law enforcement had created opportunities that no amount of traditional business development could have achieved. "Treasury wants us to develop compliance protocols for cryptocurrency exchanges," Marcus told Elena during their weekly strategy meeting. "Justice is requesting a comprehensive analysis of how consulting firms can inadvertently facilitate white-collar crime. And the State Department wants us to design due diligence procedures for companies operating in high-risk international markets." Elena reviewed the requests with the same methodical precision she'd applied to Hartwell's procurement data. But now her analysis carried the weight of recognized expertise rather than hidden competence. "The Treasury project is straightforward," Elena replied. "Cryptocurrency compliance involves applying traditional anti-money laundering frameworks to digital assets. The Justice Project is more complex. It requires understanding how criminal organizations exploit legitimate business, relationships, and the State Department work. International due diligence in high-risk markets, Elena said thoughtfully. That's essentially counterintelligence work disguised as business consulting. We'd be helping companies identify foreign entities that might be fronts for hostile intelligence services. Marcus marveled at Elena's casual discussion of concepts that most consultants would find intimidating. Her federal background had prepared her for complexities that extended far beyond traditional business strategy, creating opportunities for Meridian to serve clients in ways that few consulting firms could match. The success of Elena's compliance initiatives had also transformed Meridian's internal culture. The firm's hiring practices now emphasized character assessment alongside technical skills, recognizing that ethical judgment was as important as analytical capability. Interview processes included scenarios designed to test candidates' responses to moral dilemmas, ensuring that new hires understood Meridian's commitment to integrity. We're attracting a different type of consultant now, Patricia observed during a partner meeting. People who want to work at a firm known for ethical excellence rather than just financial performance. The change was evident in recent hires. Dr. Sarah Kim, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in corporate fraud, had joined as a senior associate. Michael Torres, a former Treasury analyst with expertise in international finance, had accepted a position developing compliance protocols for multinational corporations. David Chun, a former FBI financial crimes investigator, had become part of Elena's regulatory compliance team. We're accidentally becoming a destination for people transitioning from federal service, Marcus realized. Elena's success has created a pathway for others with similar backgrounds. The transformation extended to Meridian's client relationships. Companies that had previously viewed regulatory compliance as a necessary expense now sought Meridian's expertise as a competitive advantage. Elena's ability to navigate complex regulatory environments while maintaining productive relationships with federal agencies had become a unique value proposition. Clients trust us differently now, Elena explained to Marcus during one of their regular debriefings. They know we understand both business objectives and regulatory requirements. We're not just consultants, we're partners in maintaining ethical operations. The Carlyle financial prosecution had concluded with convictions that validated Elena's investigative work while reinforcing Meridian's reputation for integrity. Federal prosecutors had used Elena's documentation as the foundation for their case, resulting in guilty verdicts that dismantled the entire money laundering network. Media coverage consistently praised Meridian's cooperation with federal authorities, creating positive publicity that traditional marketing couldn't have achieved. The Carlyle case established precedent for how consulting firms should respond to potential criminal activity, Elena noted. We're now the example that other firms reference when developing their own compliance procedures. But Elena's most significant contribution extended beyond immediate business results. Her approach to professional service combining technical expertise with ethical commitment had begun influencing how consulting was practiced across the industry. Elena's methodology is becoming the standard, Patricia observed. Comprehensive due diligence, systematic documentation, proactive regulatory compliance. These are becoming baseline expectations for professional consulting services. The impact was measurable. Industry surveys showed that clients were increasingly prioritizing ethical practices over pure financial performance when selecting consulting firms. Meridian's approach, pioneered by Elena's federal expertise, had influenced client expectations across the entire professional services sector. Elena's influence extended to academic institutions as well. Business schools were requesting her expertise in developing curricula that integrated ethical decision-making with strategic planning. Her case study federal investigator working undercover as junior Analyst had become required reading in courses on professional ethics and regulatory compliance. The next generation of consultants is learning different principles, Elena told Marcus. They're being taught that expertise without integrity is ultimately worthless. The personal transformation was equally significant. Elena's careful transition from federal investigator to business consultant had succeeded beyond her original expectations. She had rediscovered her passion for analytical work while maintaining her commitment to public service through her hybrid role. "I'm not investigating financial crimes anymore," Elena reflected during a quiet moment in her office. "But I'm helping prevent them. The work is different, but the mission remains the same." Her methodology had evolved as well. The systematic approach she developed for federal investigations now served corporate clients seeking to maintain ethical operations. Her ability to identify potential risks and implement preventive measures had become legendary among compliance professionals. "Elena doesn't just solve problems," one client executive had written in a testimonial. "She prevents problems from occurring in the first place." Her federal background gives her insight into how criminal organizations think and operate, which helps legitimate businesses avoid becoming unwitting participants in illegal activities. The recognition extended internationally. European consulting firms were adopting Elena's compliance framework, recognizing that regulatory complexity required specialized expertise. Asian financial institutions were requesting her services for navigating U.S. regulatory requirements. Global corporations were seeking her guidance on maintaining ethical operations across multiple jurisdictions. "We're exporting American regulatory expertise," Marcus observed. Elena's federal background is helping international businesses understand and comply with U.S. law. The success had created new challenges. Demand for Elena's services exceeded her capacity to provide them, forcing Meridian to develop training programs that could replicate her methodology across multiple consultants. Elena had begun teaching master classes for senior associates, sharing federal investigative techniques that could be applied to business consulting. "The goal isn't to create junior Elena Rodriguez's," Elena explained to her training participants. "The goal is to develop consultants who think systematically about risk identification and prevention." Her influence on Meridian's junior staff was profound. Young consultants who had initially dismissed Elena as an unremarkable analyst now competed for opportunities to work on her projects. Her combination of technical expertise and ethical commitment had become the aspiration for career development. At the firm, "Elena changed how we think about professional success," one junior associate explained. "It's not just about generating revenue or advancing your career. It's about using your expertise to serve others and maintain integrity." The transformation culminated in an unexpected honor. The American Bar Association announced that Elena would receive their award for distinguished service in corporate compliance, recognizing her contributions to ethical business practices and regulatory excellence. The award ceremony would be held at the ABIA's annual convention, with Elena delivering the keynote address on ethics and expertise in professional service. "You've become a national figure in compliance consulting," Marcus told Elena when the award was announced. "Your influence extends far beyond Meridian." Elena accepted the recognition with characteristic humility, but Marcus detected genuine satisfaction in her response. The woman who had once questioned her ability to transition from federal investigations to business consulting had become a leader in professional ethics and regulatory compliance. "I never expected this," Elena admitted. "When I left federal service, I thought I was ending my career in public service. Instead, I found a way to serve the public interest through private sector work." The evening of the award ceremony, Elena stood at the podium before an audience of hundreds of legal and business professionals, delivering remarks that captured the essence of her journey from federal investigator to business consultant. "Excellence. Without integrity is ultimately meaningless, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned this lesson through years of federal service. Technical expertise matters, but character matters more. The most sophisticated analysis is worthless if it serves unethical purposes. She paused, scanning the audience of attorneys, consultants, and business executives who had gathered to hear her speak. I spent 8 years investigating financial crimes, learning how criminal organizations exploit legitimate business relationships. The most important lesson was that prevention is always better than prosecution. We can't investigate our way out of corporate crime. We have to build systems that prevent it from occurring. The speech concluded with Elena's vision for the future of professional consulting, a field where expertise and ethics were inseparable, where serving clients meant protecting them from legal risks, and where success was measured not just by financial performance, but by contributions to societies. Well, as Elena returned to her seat amid sustained applause, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The quiet analyst who had organized procurement spreadsheets had become a nationally recognized expert in corporate compliance, transforming not just Meridian Consulting, but the entire professional services industry. The revolution had been quiet, built on competence rather than self-promotion, on service rather than ambition. But its impact was profound and lasting. Elena Rodriguez had shown that true expertise combined with ethical commitment could change entire industries, one client relationship at a time. 6 months after her revelation, Elena continued her work at Meridian with the same methodical precision she'd demonstrated since joining the firm. But now her quiet competence was recognized and celebrated, rather than overlooked and underestimated. The transformation was complete, but the work continued. Elena Rodriguez had found her calling in the intersection of public service and private sector expertise, using her federal background to help legitimate businesses navigate complex regulatory environments while maintaining the ethical standards that defined her career. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't the recognition or the awards. It was the knowledge that expertise combined with integrity could create positive change that extended far beyond individual success. Elena had proven that true professional service meant using your capabilities to protect others, prevent problems, and contribute to the greater good. The quiet revolution continued, one ethical decision at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.